Yeah, I agree. And I'll just add on to that. I mean, holding, precious metals, something I've advocated since before I began on the internet, but it's part of your portfolio. In other words, that's my specialty. That's what I advocate, and I'll give you the reasons why. But really, if we want to benefit, that paradox of, a win-win situation where your investments are helping you to have a better lifestyle, and at the same time, what you invested in is also helping society with a better lifestyle or cleaner air, better water, better food, easier way of doing things, better communications, whatever it is. That's the paradox. You can, as a true capitalist, you can benefit yourself and society at large. And that's largely what I want to be on. I want to be on that where we're helping each other with, our, let's say, wise choices with what we invest in. However, when you get in a distorted situation like we've been in for many decades now, and really it happened before August 15th, 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, because we were lying before then, and that's why he closed the gold window. We said the dollar's as good as gold, but it hadn't been for a long time. Basically got caught and said, I got to stop that contract. I'm closing the gold window, as we refer to it. So the point is, we've got to come back to those basics. And you're right, there will be a time. Now, from my perspective right now, I think we're still going toward a system that's being pushed or propagandized, if that's a word, into a system of more control, not less. And the more freedom the people have with their money, the more freedom we have overall. And the more control the bankers have of the money, the more control they have overall. So I think we're at a nexus where there's a lot of people like you that have dedicated your life since, I think, age 16. I've done it most of my life to get the ideology out that, there is a direct correlation between free market economics and freedom versus some other system that really controls the system. And so we are at a very interesting point in history, but I'm just going to circle back and say you're correct. There will be a new one. And it's not necessarily the one that we have been taught about, and I've talked about, the CBDCs or a private version of the CBDC. I think that is the push. I think that's what they want. I've talked about it. I've been consistent about it. But I also hopefully have said it enough that just because that's what they want does not mean that's what's going to take place. Really inspired here the last couple of months. I mean, it was the 4th of July, and I was, I guess I was riding myself fairly hard. Meaning that, what have I accomplished what I've wanted to achieve, which is to educate people enough for them to make up their own darn mind whether or not the system that we have is one that they would have chosen freely or not. And so I wrote that piece about, money and on the 4th of July, money and freedom, basically. And then I was inspired again to talk about, how much our faith, from my perspective, has been diminished over the last few decades. And where's the faith now? And the faith is it's not in God, it's in the other God. And what's that? Primarily it's money. And so I just took off on that theme and thought, what does it really do? And so when you put your faith in, let's say, a false idol, then it revolves around value. And the propaganda is extremely good at this. I'm writing about it in the Morgan Report this month about the U.S. economy runs 70% on the consumer. That's kind of ridiculous, but that's our economy. And so we look for things outside of ourselves. So you've heard me say this before, Elijah, but always look for what you have, not what you have. And what I mean by that statement, I look for what you have as an individual as far as your integrity, your character, your moral values, your worldview, what you bring to the game rather than what you can get from it. That's your internal self. That's your relationship with whatever higher power you want to believe in or not. But it's your integrity. It's your authentic self. And what we're taught is what you have, which is everything external to you. What kind of car do you have? What kind of house? What kind of yacht? Who are your friends? What's your selfie look like? What's your social media profile look like? What kind of meals do you have? I mean, people take pictures of their meals and put it on social media. I mean, I'm not going to, if I'm free market, you're free to do that. And you are. To me, it's a little interesting, but this is the society we have. So we're looking outside of ourselves for that fulfillment, which you'll never get. You're going to get it from the heart outward. It's how big a heart do you have? I mean, some of the greatest stories ever told have to do with the underdog that has a big heart and is able to overcome all kinds of obstacles and move forward. So hopefully that's summarized it in a way that people can understand what my true meaning was in that piece, because I've seen it happen more and more as I've gotten older and older. And I'm just calling them as I see them. And you'll find as you get older, Elijah, I know you're still, quite young, at least relative to me, but you will, or I will speak for myself, you get a little more crotchety, which means you're a little more edgy and you're more prone to speak out a little harsher maybe than you were in the past, because, the political correctness is waning more and more, I'll say.
When we talk about silver, gold, or any other tangible asset, we're not just talking about money, we're talking about freedom. I've said this for decades, and I'll say it again because it's the core of why I advocate precious metals. What you hold in your hand gives you choices. It gives you sovereignty. And in a world where governments and central banks are constantly trying to tighten control, having something real, something that isn't dependent on a keystroke at the Fed, becomes not just an investment, but a lifeline. I've been around this game long enough to know that markets swing. They go up, they go down, they're manipulated, they're distorted. But the one constant is that precious metals outlast regimes, outlast monetary experiments, and outlast paper promises. When Nixon closed the gold window on August 15, 1971, he didn't destroy gold. He destroyed the credibility of the dollar. And what's fascinating is that most Americans didn't see it that way. They bought the propaganda. The dollar is as good as gold. Well, it wasn't then, and it sure isn't now. Back then, gold was $35 an ounce. Today, gold trades in the thousands, not because gold changed, but because the dollar did. The purchasing power of paper has been on a one-way road downhill ever since. Silver, though, has always fascinated me more. Because silver isn't just money. It's also indispensable in the real economy. It purifies water. It drives electronics. It powers solar panels. You can't have a green revolution without silver. And yet, even with all of those uses, silver is still priced as though it's an afterthought, a sideshow to gold. That's the opportunity, because eventually markets correct imbalances, and when they do, silver doesn't just catch up, it sprints ahead. Now let me address something important. A lot of people think investing is about greed, about piling up more stuff, bigger houses, flashier cars. But to me, investing wisely is about that paradox where your wealth and society's wealth align. If you invest in something that not only preserves your purchasing power, but also helps the world, cleaner water, better energy, more efficient communication, that's capitalism at its best. That's a win-win. And that's why silver excites me. Because when you buy silver, you're not just hedging against currency collapse. You're also aligning with industries that actually make life better. Contrast that with speculation in paper derivatives that add nothing to the world. One is parasitic, the other is productive. But let's not sugarcoat it. We live in a distorted system. The free market is free in name only. Since before Nixon closed the gold window, we've been operating under illusions. The dollar isn't backed by anything real. It's backed by confidence, and that confidence has been eroded by decades of monetary excess. More debt, more printing, more promises. And now we're at the point where even mainstream voices, people like Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan or Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, are openly warning that this can't end well. When the big money starts whispering about gold, you know the writing is on the wall. That's why I've spent so much of my life writing, speaking, and yes, sometimes ranting about silver and gold. It isn't just about ounces or charts, it's about freedom. The more freedom you have with your money, the more freedom you have in your life. The more control bankers have over your money, the more control they have over you. It's that simple. That's why central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are such a threat. They're the opposite of freedom. They give central planners total visibility and control over your spending. They can turn your money on and off like a light switch. And yes, there's a big push for it, but just because they want it doesn't mean it's inevitable. History shows us that top-down systems eventually collapse under their own weight, but it's up to us as individuals to prepare for the turbulence in between. Now let me shift gears a little and get philosophical. I know some people roll their eyes when I go this direction, but I think it's important. Money isn't just about transactions, it's about values. Where is your faith? In my view, too many people have shifted their faith from higher principles, call it God, call it morality, call it integrity, into the false idol of money itself. Money has become the god, and when money becomes the god, you end up with a society obsessed with externals. What kind of car do you drive? What does your selfie look like? How many followers do you have on social media? We measure ourselves by what we have, not who we are. But true wealth doesn't come from the outside in. It comes from the inside out. It's your integrity, your authenticity, your character. Those are the real assets. Gold and silver just help you safeguard them in a corrupt world.
I would say you could call it a change of trend. I mean, from my perspective, and if you want to call it analysis, I think we have peaked temporarily. I mean, first of all, I said that at gold at 3,500 a couple months back, and I wrote, for our premium service that gold would be doing a trading range throughout the summer and possibly longer. And I also said that during that point in time, it would be good to either trade gold for platinum or silver, or if you wanted to add your positions, add platinum, add silver. And both those metals took off relative to gold. So in other words, gold stayed basically steady state, and both platinum and palladium recently have all shot up. However, I think they have hit that point that gold did a few months back, meaning that they are going to establish a range for a while. I think how long, I don't know yet. I haven't seen enough data, but I would just guess it probably through the end of the summer. For example, we're end of July. August is usually the worst month or best month, depending on how you look at it, for gold. In other words, usually the cyclical low for gold is established in August. So that's another month out. And then September, the old adage, sell in May and come back after Labor Day. That's usually about the third week of September. So I would guess, from historic precedent, we would see probably all four metals move in a trading range from here, probably for a couple months at a minimum. Obviously, something could hit. But most of the news that's favorable to the metals is already kind of put into the price. And I know everyone's thinking there's very little resistance for silver from, 39 up, but hit 39 briefly, and now it's dropped off about $1, he said. So that's it. Sideways is what I expect. Doesn't mean the bull market's over. It's really healthy for markets to consolidate and build another base and move up. I made that comment on another interview recently. What you really don't want is a higher price every day, and then you get into a parabolic move. Those are not sustainable. But if you staircase up, you build a base at 32, then it jumps up to 34, and you build a base there, and then it jumps up to 36, and you build a base there. Of course, that's an idealized base because, they go up and down. But basically speaking, if you look at the charts, that's kind of what it looks like, a stair. And those are pretty stable because you have a base, so then you have a support level, then you move up and you build another support level. That's what I'm looking at.
No, I know there's been some, in some sense, good news about the trade wars, some deals being made with Japan and the EU. Do you see that having any long-term impact on the price? I know the prices are off slightly because of that news, though, in the metals.
Well, as we both know, the tariff situation is like playing 21 at Las Vegas. You could keep rolling the dice over and over and coming up with a different number. But on the basis of what you asked me, yeah, I think there's a little more stability, a little more reconciling what these tariffs are really going to look like, and a little more solidity to the proposition that, here's what we're going to do, and you can kind of like depend on that. So yeah, I think markets hate instability. They hate the unknown. So even though tariffs might not be suitable to the counterparty that has to pay them, once they are established and consistent and they know what they're going to be for some, time frame, then the market can kind of, take that in and work.
When we talk about silver and gold, we're not just talking about shiny metals that sit in vaults. We're talking about civilization's oldest form of trust. I want you to think about that word for a second. Trust. Because ultimately, every monetary system is about trust. Trust that when you work, save, and exchange your labor for money, that money will hold value tomorrow. Trust that the institutions managing it won't debase it away or weaponize it against you. And that trust, my friends, is breaking down. Now, I've been at this a long time. I've seen cycles, booms, busts, and manipulations. But what strikes me today isn't just that gold and silver are rising. It's that they're rising in a world where confidence in fiat is visibly eroding. You can see it in the headlines. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace since the 1970s. You can see it in the trade flows. China quietly hoarding metal off exchange, Russia building its own bullion markets, India vacuuming up silver by the boatload. And you can see it in the fact that even mainstream institutions, yes, even the likes of Bank of America and Goldman Sachs, are openly forecasting higher gold prices. When the establishment admits it, you know it's real. But let's drill down. Silver is the key. Why? Because silver isn't just money, it's also industrial. That dual role is what makes silver so explosive when the monetary system wobbles. Demand from industry doesn't go away. If anything, it accelerates with green technology, electrification, medical uses, and communication networks. At the same time, when monetary fear drives investors into hard assets, silver suddenly has to serve two masters. And the truth is, there simply isn't enough silver above ground to meet both demands simultaneously. That's when you see silver behave like it's strapped to a rocket, and we are inching closer to that moment. Now, I've said before, I don't like to make price predictions, but I do like to analyze history. The gold to silver ratio has averaged about 45 to 1 for the last 150 years. Today, it sits well above that, even after recent rallies. If gold were to hit, say, $4,000 an ounce, and that's a conservative estimate given the debt dynamics, and silver simply normalized back to a 50 to 1 ratio, you're looking at $80 silver. That's not fantasy, that's math. And math doesn't care about narratives. And yet silver still doesn't get the respect it deserves. Most people think it's just another commodity. Some even dismiss it as poor man's gold. But that's a misunderstanding. Silver is money, always has been. It's a deliverable FX cross against the dollar, the yen, the euro. Basel III doesn't classify it the way it does gold. But don't mistake that for irrelevance. The fact is, silver is a monetary metal wearing an industrial disguise. And that disguise keeps the mainstream from seeing what insiders already know. When confidence in fiat erodes, silver becomes a safe haven too. Now let's step back and look at the broader system. Because metals don't exist in isolation. They reflect the health or sickness of the monetary order. Right now, the sickness is obvious. Debt at every level, government, corporate, consumer, is at records. Insiders are selling equities by the billions, while retail traders chase options at all-time highs. Comics deliveries are setting records, with more contracts standing for physical settlement than I've ever seen in my 36 years in this industry. Every signal screams the same message. The insiders are quietly preparing for something big, while the herd is being led into slaughter. And here's where it gets interesting. Behind the scenes, there's a quiet but very real push toward revaluing gold. I've been called a conspiracy theorist for saying this in the past, but now it's on the Federal Reserve's own website. Analysts at Bank of America, people like Michael Hartnett and Francisco Blanche, are openly saying central banks will be forced to revalue gold reserves because of debt burdens. That's not fringe anymore. That's mainstream, and it's logical. Revaluing gold gives governments a way to soft default, to reduce the debt burden without explicitly defaulting. It's financial alchemy, and it's one of the few tools left in the box. So when people like Judy Shelton float the idea of pegging long-term treasuries to gold, or when we hear whispers about partial gold backing for currencies, it's not just academic theory, it's preparation. Because the current system is unsustainable. You can't keep issuing trillions in new debt while weaponizing the dollar against geopolitical rivals and expect the rest of the world to play along. They're not. They're building alternatives. And those alternatives are anchored in commodities: gold, silver, oil, and even base metals. Let me tell you something most people don't realize. Base metals, when priced in gold, are historically cheap. Alasdair Macleod recently pointed out that a basket of base metals is at about 23% of its 1900 level relative to gold. That's a century of underpricing. Silver, as a base metal with monetary DNA, sits right in the middle of this distortion. When that distortion corrects, and it always does, you're going to see silver move in ways that catch even seasoned investors off guard. Now, people often ask me, what about CBDCs? Isn't that the future? My answer is they'll try. Central planners always want more control, not less. CBDCs give them total visibility and programmability. They can dictate not just how much money you have, but how and when you spend it. That's power beyond anything we've seen in monetary history. And yes, they're pushing hard for it. But here's the paradox. The more they push, the more people will seek alternatives. Because human beings value freedom, and money is freedom. That's why physical gold and silver will never go away. They are the ultimate exit ramp. I wrote a piece on July 4th about money and freedom. I asked, is the system we have today one we would have freely chosen? I don't think so. It's a system built on illusions, debt, and control. But here's the encouraging part. People are waking up. Slowly, yes, but surely. And once enough people realize that real money isn't what the government decrees, but what the market chooses, the tide shifts. That's why I keep educating. Because the more people understand, the less power propaganda has. And let's be honest, propaganda is everywhere. The economy, we're told, runs on 70% consumption. That's absurd. True wealth isn't built on consumption. It's built on production, savings, and honest money. But we've been trained to measure ourselves by externals. What you have, not who you are. That's why I say, look for what you have inside, your integrity, your character, your worldview. That's the foundation. Precious metals simply give you the stability to live those values in a volatile world. Now let's zoom out globally, because this isn't just about America. Russia, the world's second largest gold producer, is launching the St. Petersburg International Mercantile Exchange to trade physical gold outside the LBMA's control. China is building its own infrastructure for commodity settlement. BRICS nations are openly discussing alternatives to the dollar. This isn't theoretical, it's happening, and every step they take chips away at Western dominance in pricing gold and silver. Eventually, the LBMA and COMEX won't set the price. The physical market will, and when that day comes, the shenanigans of dumping a year's worth of production in 2 minutes will end. Supply and demand will matter again, and when that happens, silver in particular will reprice violently higher. Now, I don't want to end this without touching on the human side, because at the end of the day, this isn't just charts and ratios. It's about people. It's about you, me, our families, our communities. What kind of world do we want to live in? One where money is a tool of freedom, or one where it's a tool of control? That choice is playing out right now. Every ounce of silver or gold you hold is a vote for freedom. Every dollar you leave in a system that is being weaponized against you is a vote for control. That's the stark reality. So let me leave you with this thought. History's greatest stories, the underdog overcoming impossible odds, the hero standing firm against corruption, the individual making a difference, always come down to heart. How big a heart do you have? How much courage? Precious metals won't give you courage. That has to come from within. But they will give you the freedom and stability to act on it. And that's why I keep advocating them, not just as investments, but as instruments of freedom. Because when the illusions collapse, and they always do, you want to be holding something real. You want to be on the side of freedom, not control. And in my view, silver and gold aren't just metals. They're a statement that you refuse to be a slave to paper promises, a statement that you value integrity over illusion, and a statement that in the end, freedom is worth more than fiat. That's why I believe with every ounce of my being that we are living in one of the greatest opportunities in history. Silver, misunderstood and undervalued, is the chance of a lifetime. Gold, steady and timeless, is the anchor. Together, they are the antidote to a system built on sand. And the sooner people realize it, the sooner they can reclaim not just their wealth, but their freedom.
Stay informed about the latest developments shaping the precious metals markets with regular updates from the Finance Daily team. Not only that, but as a subscriber, you'll also receive timely silver and gold price notifications and early access to groundbreaking news unavailable to the general public. Join our free gold and silver newsletter today, link in the description.